Thank you so much, everybody, for your time investment to attend today's book summary. As a club, we decide on a book and read. The entire club reads, and individually, we have our own objectives, purposes, professional obligations, and we read books that way as well. And everybody is welcome to present the book summaries which they have recently read. Now, before I jump into this particular book, I would like to talk about some of the questions which I hear from my colleagues, my friends. They say that we really want to read books. We really know that, people who have reached a certain level in their personal life or professional life, they are the ones who read a lot of books. So there's no questions about the importance or the wisdom which we get from reading books, right? However, we don't know how to read, or we don't know which book to pick up. We don't have time. Or somebody will say that I had read a book, but then after 10 pages I lost interest, and hence I don't think it is my cup of tea. So people have had not very good experiences reading books, and that is dictating their current behavior. Some people don't have time, of course, and some people don't know which books to read. So how do we address this, right? So I did a little bit of research and figured out that it is real that due to a bad experience, people don't pick up reading books. So what is the solution? So I'll ask you guys, if you're reading uh, a paragraph and there's a word, a new word, gist, for example, it comes, how do you make sense of that word? How do you find out the meaning of that word? Any of you can answer this question. You can unmute yourself.
I see the meaning in the dictionary, or just go Google search. Or if I have a application like a pocketbook reader, then it has the dictionary attached. So when I click on that particular word, it shows.
Perfect. So whenever we find a new word or any complex word, we go to the origins. We go to oxford.com, we go to dictionary.com, we go to the authority on that subject and find out the meaning, right? Once you find out the definition of that word, then you read that word in the article which you're reading, the paragraph you're reading, and then you make sense of the paragraph, right? Similarly, in books, these are called foundational books. So what is a foundational book? A foundational book is a book which is an authority on that subject. For example, if suppose you want to know about innovation, you want to learn about disruption, then for corporate folks who are here, I mean, there's a book by the name of Innovators Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. It is on disruption. So it's a foundational book on the digital transformation, right? Anybody who wants to know about philosophy, right? Then in that case, we have a book, The Republic by Plato. No, it's all about philosophy. How do you think on an abstract level, not tactical, practical level? Go one step above, go two steps above. So, what is the philosophy behind everything? Right. So that's a foundational book if you really want to crack philosophy. Similarly, if you want to travel, if you have a wanderlust, I'm sure Minakshi is there, Rajveer is there, everybody travel for they love travel. There are books like Vagabonding. There's book like On the Road by Jack. Uh, uh, so these are the books. These are foundational books. So we should pick up these books if you really want to read or start reading. If you pick up a wrong book, which is itself is not foundational, you'll get lost. Similarly, if you want to know more about macroeconomics, we all know that Wealth of Nation, right? The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, Atomic Habits. You just name it. For product management folks, there's a book called Inspired. For entrepreneurship, E-Myth Revisited, which talks about the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneurship, and how these three personas are in three different directions. That gives that foundational clarity. And similarly, for sustainability, there's so much of buzz around it, right? Climate change, United UN declarations. There's so much of buzz. So how do you make sense of what is carbon footprint? What is climate change. How do we address it? So the foundational book on this subject is How Bad Are Bananas by Professor Mike Berners Lee. Now, Professor Mike is teaching in Lancaster University, and this is by far known as the foundational book on this subject. So let's get started with the book. Are we all ready?
Yes.
All right. All right. So one of the American authors have written about this book, and he says it's terrific that this book not only makes you aware about the sustainability concepts, but also gives you facts, and also there is a lot of humor in it. So when was the last time you read a serious informational book and it had humor in it? Just like any other fiction book. So that was the skill which author has uh, put into this book, and that makes it really worth read. It's around 250 pages, not very big, but then it's interesting read because every chapter there would be a little bit of humor. So let's get started. So when we talk about carbon footprint of everything, what does that mean? For example, we are using this laptop. I am using this mobile phone. We drive car to our office. We put diesel. We eat food. We eat rice. We eat a burger at McDonald's. We drink a bottle of wine. So there are a lot of things happening in our life, right? But what is the carbon equivalent of that? So to make sense of the climate change and the impact, the carbon footprint can be broken down into two things. One is for whatever product we are using, what is the how much carbon was emitted into the atmosphere for making that product. So this phone got manufactured, how much carbon was when something gets manufactured, there are so many gases, right? For example, there would be carbon dioxide, CO2, there would be methanes, CH4, there would be nitrogen oxide. But then it's very difficult to keep track of so many of scientific words and scientific gases, right? So the equivalent, CO2 equivalent, when it is called, it means that keeping everything together, like if methane is being released into the atmosphere, then what is the CO2 equivalent of that? If nitrogen oxide is being if you put fertilizer in agricultural land, nitrogen is comes out, emitted. So what is the carbon? So everything, for the sake of simplicity, all these gases have been converted into CO2. That is the carbon equivalent, and that is a concept I want you all to clearly understand, because this will simplify the rest of the session today. So all the gases being released is converted into CO2 equivalent. So let's move on. Right. Now, one more concept before I get started with the book is I would be talking about 1 gram of CO2 equivalent, 1 kg of CO2 equivalent, 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. So what does that mean? So from a conceptual perspective, it is important to understand that you have seen that chana, right? When we eat chana dal or something. So that chana is, if you make a chana of diesel or petrol and put a light stick to it, obviously it will burn like. So the amount of gas, carbon, which is emitted when you burn that is 1 gram of CO2 equivalent. So just for the sake of concept. Similarly, we all drink a cup of tea. If we fill two such cup of teas with gas or petrol or diesel and we burn it, the amount of carbon which will be emitted in the atmosphere would be equal to 1 kg of carbon. And third, you have seen the fish tanks at some of the places. I have seen fish tanks. So just imagine the amount of water is there in the fish tank. That is equivalent to 60 gallons. So if you burn that entire fish tank, you put fire, so it will obviously keep burning for, I think, maybe an hour or 2 hours, because there's a lot of content. But the entire smoke or the carbon which will get emitted in the atmosphere will be equal to 1 ton. Having said that, let's move on to the third concept, which third and the final concept before we get started. And that is, we need to understand what is direct and what is indirect. So any of you want to let us know what is direct emission, what is indirect emissions?
Abhinav, I can try.
All right, just give it one more shot.
Yeah, so I think direct emission, with respect to consumer, if you're asking, direct emission would be if I'm driving a car, the fuel that I'm burning, or maybe the carbon footprint that I'm causing from point A to point B, that would be the direct. But the indirect, there are a lot of things behind it. The cost of carbon footprint while I bought that car, or maybe all the components that are being made, the carbon footprint for that. So all these constitute for the indirect. So it's not only the fuel, but also multiple things behind the car, behind the petrol pump, behind everything that causes extra carbon footprint.
Perfect. And this is why this concept is important, is because as per the author, whenever countries or whenever companies, they report their emissions, more often than not, they just talk about the direct emissions. For example, a car showroom owner would say, see, my showroom, this much electricity I'm using, this is the paper I use for invoices, and this is what it is. But he is not taking care of the car which is getting manufactured in a factory and coming here. He would say that is not my responsibility, right? Similarly, when countries report emissions, the country will say these are all the factories in all my states and cities. This is total carbon dioxide emitted into the environment. But all the export or the raw material which is being exported from other countries to these factories, right? Because the factories will need raw material coming maybe China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. So that is not considered, not captured. So that is wrong. So whenever we talk about emissions, it has to be the direct emission which you are taking, you are responsible for, plus the raw material, supply chain, everything included. Including, even if the from as long as possible, from a supply chain perspective. So this is the third concept, which is very important. Now let's move on to the interesting part of this book. So the author says is, globally, so you understood 1 ton of emission, right? That fish tank. So the author says is, globally, all of us, like Abhinav, Ashwin, Rajveer, Meenakshi, all of us, we have a 6 ton footprint per year. So every year we wear clothes, we eat food, we go to office, come back, whatever we do, our lifestyle. So on an average, each human has a 6 ton per year. So imagine every year you're burning 6 fish tanks, and that carbon dioxide is going. Now, whether you yourself directly are responsible or you are wearing a shirt which is being manufactured from, and raw materials coming somewhere else, everything included. So this is an important, of course, the developed countries like United States or UK, Europe, they are far ahead because their consumption, their lifestyle is much more, they use a much more manufacturing products. And countries like India and China who export, so the emission happens here, but the products go there and consumed there, right? So this is another important thing. Now let's move on to the beauty of this book. There are 80 such items the author has researched. He has researched from a pint of beer to cycling, going one place to other, doing a web search, sending an email, eating a banana, on a road, if you go on a road trip, a burger, even a volcano. So hats off to the author. I mean, half of the book is all research documents. If you see at the last, which we usually don't read, index, and after that, you will see the lines of research. I mean, some 20 pages, all the reference links. So a lot of research has gone into this book. I would not be covering all of this in the interest of time, but I'll just cover few of them so that you get the contrast and the humor which this author has brilliantly brought into. So he asks us, which beer do you want to have, right? So when on weekends when we socialize with our friends, so we have choices, right? So when we have to make a choice that okay, we have a brewery, so we are going to a brewery and ordering a pint of beer, or we go to a restaurant and we say, one that brand, bring that which is bottle, bring it. So I'll have a bottled one, or we want imported ones, right? Spanish wine or French champagne. So we also use that. So which one is more? So price wise, they would be different. So it's not a matter of cheap or expensive. Here, the connotation is from a carbon footprint perspective, which one is better for the environment, which one is better for the earth, right? So that way, he's saying the locally brewed beer is the best one. As you can see, 300 grams. So you can just connect that, that P's which I discussed earlier. So 300 P's. If you drink a glass of beer, it is equivalent to that much of carbon which has been emitted to make and manufacture and brew this beer. Moving on. Now, we all think that yes, taking a cycle from place A to B is much better, way better than driving a car or driving an XUV. The diesel one, which with the 12 kilometers per liter. So we feel proud about it, right? Yeah, that's so what. I feel like a king driving SUV. However, look at the humor. So our author says that, yeah, driving a cycle is much better, but then it depends whether you're eating a banana and then you're driving the cycle or you're having a burger. So if suppose you go to McDonald's, eat a beef burger or a chicken burger, and then drive your bicycle thinking that, this is environmentally good, he's saying, no, you've already had 1 ton consumption in the burger, which is the energy you're using to drive. So if you really want to do an impact, it is across. So you eat bananas for breakfast, then drive bicycle. So that was an interesting take. And of course, as you can see, depending on what you eat, the uh, the impact of that cycle ride is 65 grams, 90 grams. If you are eating cheeseburgers, it becomes what, 3 times, 4 times, 260 grams. So this was like really contrasting and revealing to me. So that's why the interest in this book keeps on remaining. Now, another contrast or interesting thing, do you know that when we drive a car, we think that, oh, look at the exhaust which is coming out, right? But I was surprised to know that in the entire lifetime of a car, the total exhaust which comes out is equal to the emissions which were already embedded in the car when I bought it. I mean, any of you have any views here, please? Because I was astounded. I mean, I was really surprised that before even we buy a car, the amount of emissions which has already been done, impact done, is way higher than what we think that we are putting diesel and we are driving, which is nothing, you know. So that was very interesting for me. All right, let's move on. Now we all do this web search, right? So our author, he went into deep research. When you do a Google search, so there is 0.2 gram of emission. So if you just say how bad are bananas, and you click on search button, then the total amount of emission would be equal to 0.2 grams. Now, interestingly, I wasn't aware about this, that it is just, so when you're doing a Google search or whenever you are sending an email, okay, how many of you send more than 100 emails, receive more than 100 emails a day? You can just say yes, more than 100, or no, less than 100. Any of you?
Less than 100.
Less than 100.
Less than 100.
Yeah. So actually, I calculated my Gmail and my Office Outlook. So putting both together, it was more than 100. But surprisingly, when we send an email, obviously my phone has some embedded emissions because I bought it, it got manufactured. So that plus the internet connectivity, either Vodafone or the data center, wherever, Microsoft data center, wherever that email will be stored, and the reader of the email. So I'm sending it to, let's say, Vidya. So when Vidya will be reading the email using her laptop or her phone, she will also be consuming or emitting something, right? So it is the addition of all this value chain of the communication chain, and everything together. So only Google search is 0.2 grams, but the entire ecosystem will make it 4 times 0.8 grams of CO2 equivalent, as you can see at the bottom. Now bananas. So this is like everybody would be interested to know, right? Because the book talks about bananas. So the banana has a very low footprint, and why? Because let's say apples. In India, especially, we have these apples, and it's written New Zealand, right? Or the kiwi apples. So the author says that uh, when we eat a kiwi apple, right? The apple is being produced, let's say in New Zealand, and then it gets transported to the seaports through a truck, and then seaports using ships, it gets shipped to, let's say, Bombay or Chennai, India, and then from there again trucks load come to our local market, and then they also refrigerate it in the middle, because otherwise the fruits will go bad. So when you're eating an apple, let's say 200 rupees or 100 rupees apple, you have to think about the carbon footprint of the entire ecosystem. However, contrast to that, for bananas, see, bananas can be shipped, and it does not need air refrigeration, right, during the shipment. It does not need aeroplane, because it can withstand a longer period of shipment time, unlike other fruits where the shelf life is less. So you have to fly it by aeroplane. And it has a natural covering. The banana, when you peel it, it has a covering. So it also doesn't need wrapper or paper to wrap it, which other fruits does, and hence the carbon footprint of a banana is way better than any other fruit. And I think that was the metaphor which he must have loved. That's why he put the banana on the first page of the book. But the point here is that we should eat those fruits or vegetables which are locally produced, and it is not air freighted or transported from various parts of the world. The reason is because there is a lot of indirect emissions which we don't see, but there's a lot of indirect emissions in the supply chain. All right, moving to finally last two slides. We think that traveling from one place to other place, but eating vegetables and fruits is better. We think that plane is better than. We think that SUVs, there's a lot of diesel, so maybe an aeroplane is better. But no, if you look at the facts, banana ride is 53 grams, bus is 66 grams, small car 330, plane is cheap. The plane is better than SUV. So if you have to drive like from here to Nagpur, Harsh's city, or go to Delhi to meet Rajveer or Jaipur, taking a plane is better than driving through your own car or SUV. So that was my takeaway from this book. Now a question to all of you guys. So we eat veg, we eat non-veg, right? And we think that eating non-veg is also like eating veg, because I am eating a goat has eaten grass, so it is the same thing, right? But from a carbon footprint perspective, it is not the same thing. The reason is sun energy comes into, let's say, maize, and maize is eaten by, let's say, the animal, and then the animal will live its life, may keep herself warm, burp. Cows burp a lot, methane will get emitted, and then it will be converted into meat, and then the meat will be processed in a factory, and then it will go to McDonald's. McDonald's will make it inside the burger, and we'll eat, right? So all of that is way more impactful carbon footprint perspective, rather than just eating vegetables. So the point here is, it is not equal to eat meat or vegetables. Vegetables is way better than processed food. So just go like a caveman, right? Just go natural. This is some more data facts, and going beyond what I just mentioned. When we talk about meat, what happens is the goats or pigs or cow would also need to graze. So they need a field where there is grass, right? They have to go and eat. So deforestation happens because of that also, because there's excess meat, demand for meat, right? So that in an indirect way, it also has an environment footprint. Moving on, using a cell phone, Suppose I talk to somebody on a phone for a minute, that is equivalent to the entire carbon emissions through an apple. So imagine the apple, getting the fruit coming out of a tree, right? So that's interesting to know that 1 minute is equal to the entire life of an apple, how much emission it impacts. All right, this is the final slide. So I'll ask you all a question. You've seen an aeroplane, right? Can you tell me, out of the total weight of the aeroplane, how much weight is the fuel itself, the aero fuel, the fuel which an aeroplane uses? Any of you? What is the percentage? 50% is fuel in terms of weight, or what? Come on, guesstimate.
Ton maybe.
Okay. Yeah. Come again.
1 ton.
All right. So if you look at an aeroplane, of course, yeah, 1/3. It's mentioned also. So 1/3 of the weight of an aeroplane is the weight of the fuel, and when it goes to 30,000 feet and flies, the amount of emission. I mean, of course, these two cryogenic engines, the engines of the aeroplane, they are turned on, and gas gets the exhaust gets emitted. But interestingly, the total CO2 which gets emitted, or the CO2 equivalent which gets emitted, is 3 times the weight of the fuel. So 1/3, but multiplied by 3. So the entire weight of the aeroplane is emitted by the aeroplane at that height, at 30,000 feet, which is much more impactful. So we should avoid, as per the author, we should avoid aeroplanes for longer journeys, like and maybe take ship or some other way. And also, one trip is equivalent to 340,000 disposable plastic bags. So if you're flying from, let's say, Bombay to Delhi, just imagine the total the impact is equal to using 3.5 lakh plastic bags. So all right. So we reached the end of the book summary. What is the takeaway? The takeaway is, as per author, the climate emergency is real. We all hear about 1.5 degree Celsius. 1.5 degrees we have to reduce, right? Otherwise, so many things happening. Rainfalls are not timed well, landslides and floods. So the climate real is emergent. It's an emergency. It is human made. So we have to blame ourselves because we have made these factories and all of that. And the silver lining is we can do something about it. So these are the 3 assumptions which the author has written this book with. And the meaning out of this book is, like, suppose when we have to buy a car, and we also have to buy a flat, a house. So we do this mental calculation, right? The financial calculation. Okay, if I have to buy a car, then maybe I have to buy a house next year, or 5 lakhs versus 50 lakhs. So we do this calculation and then decide, right? Suppose I have to take a bottle of wine, so maybe then I'll sacrifice going by taxi. I'll take a local train or a bus, because I have to save money there so that I can buy wine. So those kind of decisions we take, right? So the author is saying that in our day-to-day life, reading a physical book, reading an e-book, right? So whenever you're making a decision, you think from carbon impact perspective also. So your carbon instincts and your choices have to be attuned, right? So that is the purpose of this book, that we start thinking, just like financial sense, we should start thinking from a carbon instinct perspective and take our decisions and become better human beings and better caring for the earth. And one thing which I have added from my side is that Mother Earth is just not something we are leaving for our next generation. It is what we are gifting to our next generation. With that, I would like to end the book summary. If there are any questions, I can handle that.